The reason the situation is very different in publicly traded companies is because there typically are many, many owners, and many of those owners don't own a very large share. So to depict it graphically, here we have the separation between ownership and control, but in publicly traded companies, it looks like that. Now, if you didn't go ooh and ah there in video land, I'm really disappointed because that's about as good as my PowerPoint tricks can get. So I hope that you appreciated that one. If you didn't, back up the video and watch it again because that's about as good as I can do. So the textbook makes the point that there's just not that many people in charge, and who is in charge is becoming very different. I want to dive into Netflix. It's a company that we're all familiar with, and probably right now it's getting a lot of usage uh, on your devices to see what it looks like for them. So here we're checking out the Yahoo Finance page for Netflix on this date. Several years ago, Netflix fell to about $60, $70 a share, and I said, man, that company's way undervalued. I should buy some of their stock. Well, I didn't at that time, and we see where it is today. Story of my investing life. But what I want you to see, this is who owns Netflix. So you can see that in the major shareholders, 1.62% of the shares are held by all insiders. These are people who work for the company. Now, what that means is, in theory, Reed Hastings shares owns less than 1.62% of Netflix at this point. Sometimes the way they count stuff gets pretty complicated, so I'm not willing to go completely down that conclusion. But nonetheless, it says that not that many shares are held by insiders. Look at this number: 83% of the stock are held by institutions. And this is where it was talking about in the textbook, and you can see who they are. These are the major mutual fund companies. There's the BlackRock that the textbook talked about. This is the Vanguard Group. This is where my wife and I have a lot of our investments. So in a sense, I'm sure that we own a slice of Netflix because these are the two holdings that we have the most money in with Vanguard, the total stock market and the Vanguard 500 fund. So it says that you can see they own good sized chunks of Netflix. Isn't it interesting that they talk about owning as little as 5% of a company can give you a significant amount of control, but you can see why, because nobody owns a very big chunk. Now, this is not an economics or a public policy class, but it's interesting that they significantly rewrote this chapter in the textbook recently. So if you were to go back at least a couple of editions ago, you wouldn't see this discussion of institutional holders. And so you wonder about how much power the people, because if we were to look at a lot of big publicly traded companies, we would see these same names near the top. And so these people get a lot of power in terms of how they vote as shareholders. I'm not sure that's in the best interest of the company, but or of the future, but that's the way it works. So step A in this debate is these institutional shareholders and how aggressive they are in trying to exert their will on the company. And you can see you can be the dominant shareholder without a whole lot of, not a dominant, you can be a major shareholder without having a huge slice of the pie. And you can see if these companies just got together and agreed what the right answer is for that, they would control a huge part of the votes when any issue goes to the shareholders. And so they would be very influential. Okay, let's go back to the slides. So step A, we talked about the diverse ownership. Step B is the role of the board of directors. Because the ownership is diverse, or diffuse, I should say, not diverse, both diverse and diffuse. This is the job of the board of directors. In theory, a board is appointed by the owners to represent their interests, given that they know they don't have time to pay attention. So that becomes the board of directors' job. So step B in this answer of how do we control companies is we appoint a board of directors to represent the views of the ownership. Well, again, how does that look for Netflix? This is the members of the board of directors right here. These are the names. Couple of important concepts. Got to scroll down to get it. Who are they? Notice this little suitcase indicates an independent director, and you're going to see that many of them are independent directors. Only two are not considered independent. Reed Hastings, the CEO, and this Matthias Döpfner. Then you see these are the three major committees of the boards of directors. The audit committee, these are the people that certify the financials. So in theory, these are the people that make sure the company has fairly and accurately reported the financials to the public community. The compensation committee, who does it compensate? It compensates that dude right there. They may also decide the compensation for a couple of the other key leadership positions, but for the most part, the job of the board of directors is to control this person, the CEO, and the CEO takes care of everything else. And then the nominating governance committee, these are the people that set the rules for governance, but most importantly, they nominate the slates of the boards of directors. So let's take just a second and let's look at these individuals and see who they are. There's Reed Hastings. He is the founder of the company. Let's go to the directors. Let's look at these last two. Brad Smith, company director since March 2015, not that long, which is one of the things you'd be interested in. How long have they been a director? And you can see he's a lawyer by education, and he spent a long time at Microsoft. Okay, that's pretty impressive. Miss Sweeney, she's been on the board also since March of 2015, so they came in at the same time. And she's from the entertainment world. 3 decades at Walt Disney, Fox, and Viacom. That makes a lot of sense because she understands the entertainment industry. So that's what the Netflix board looks like. What do they do? Well, just exactly what we talked about with the committees. The audit committee reviews the financials. This is because of the Enron scandal. And all the board of directors saying, we didn't know, we didn't know, we didn't know. Well, now the chairman of the board has to sign the financials. So he or she cannot say, I didn't know. Like I said, they approve the CEO compensation, and then they approve the strategy and provide advice. There are 3 ways that you could be, or they segregate boards of directors members into 3 groups. Insider, this means that they are a company of the, I'm sorry, they're an employee of the company. Not uncommon to see the CEO, the CFO, other C-suite officers who work for the company on the board of directors. A related outsider is someone who does not work for the company, but by virtue of the relationship between typically the CEO and that individual, they're not considered independent. Lastly is an outsider. Sometimes the term that will be used synonymously is an independent director. They are not an employee of the company, and in theory, they don't benefit directly from the company's performance one way or the other than the fact that they would be a shareholder. So, what's the relative value of these things? In theory, you'd say, well, I want all outsiders as board of directors members because I don't want them to be good friends of the CEO and loyal to them versus loyal to the shareholders. And I certainly wouldn't want people on the inside because that's like the fox watching the hen house. The reality is a little more complicated than that. This only works if you have smart people who hopefully have a little bit of industry experience so that they understand what's going on. This, I can't really make a positive case for these groups because a related outsider, hard to make a case for that. An insider you can make a case for because they, in fact, know the business. They bring expertise to the board of directors. They understand what the company's trying to do. And so they should be able to speak very intelligently and should have a role on the decisions. The trend today is very much toward outsiders or independent directors. And the reason for that is very sound. What you have to balance that with is they have to be informed enough, they have to be savvy enough to be effective, because someone who doesn't know, they just become a rubber stamp for what the CEO wants to do. Another thing that's interesting is there's a lot a pressure today to make sure that the outsiders or the independent directors own a good chunk of stock. Okay, you can make a good case for that. That way they're aligned with the rest of the shareholders. That makes complete sense. But if you put the threshold very high, who do you guarantee? You're only going to have rich people on the board of directors. And maybe that's what you want because maybe they, in fact, do have the best business interests, but not always that way. For example, Walmart, many decades ago, had a very young lawyer who did not own a big chunk of the stock of Walmart, but who was very influential in the state of Arkansas, which is where Walmart is headquartered, on its board of directors. That young, influential lawyer who did not have a lot of money, Hillary Rodham Clinton. And so if you put the bar too high, or you don't have at least a few outside directors who maybe don't have the wealth to own a lot of stock, you're going to limit yourself into who you see. So then you get into this question of, should the CEO also be the chairman of the board? That's a really good question, and that's one that we're going to answer in the next video.